Maya's laughter rang through the service area as she balanced 4 plates on her arm with the effortless grace of someone who'd been doing this for years. Table 9 wants extra breadsticks. And the gentleman at 12 is asking for you specifically again. I glanced up from wiping down wine glasses, my stomach doing that familiar flutter it always did when Dante Romano requested my section. 3 months he'd been coming here, and I still couldn't figure out why a man who clearly had better places to be chose to spend his Friday nights at the Silver Spoon. He tips well, Maya continued, nudging me with her elbow. And he's easy on the eyes. What's the problem? The problem was that everything about Dante Romano set off alarm bells in my head. Not the kind that screamed danger, well, not entirely, but the kind that whispered secrets. My degree in criminal psychology had trained me to read people, to spot the tells that most missed, and Dante had tells written all over him in a language I was still trying to decode. No problem, I lied, smoothing down my black apron and checking my reflection in the stainless steel surface of the espresso machine. My dark hair was still neatly twisted into its usual work bun, though a few strands had escaped during the dinner rush. At 26, I'd learned to present a competent, approachable image, essential in the service industry where your paycheck depended on people liking you enough to leave decent tips. The dining room hummed with the usual Friday night energy, couples celebrating anniversaries, business associates closing deals over expensive wine, groups of friends unwinding after long weeks. I'd become an expert at reading the social dynamics, understanding the subtle hierarchies and unspoken tensions that played out across white tablecloths and flickering candles. Tonight, though, something felt different. I'd first noticed it around 10:30, when a man in an expensive charcoal suit had taken table 8. Nothing unusual there, the Silver Spoon attracted Boston's well-dressed crowd, but this particular customer had ordered 3 drinks in the past hour without touching any of them. Instead, he sat with his back straight, shoulders tense, checking his watch with the obsessive regularity of someone operating on a precise timeline. More concerning was his positioning. Table 8 offered a perfect sight line to Table 12, Dante's usual spot. Every few minutes, the man's gaze would drift in that direction, not obviously, but with the kind of peripheral awareness that spoke of professional surveillance. Then there was the guy at the bar, mid-30s, expensive Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than my monthly rent, nursing the same whiskey for 45 minutes. He'd positioned himself with clear views of both the main entrance and the kitchen corridor, his posture too rigid for someone supposedly relaxing after work. The way he kept adjusting his jacket suggested he was carrying something he didn't want noticed. A third man had claimed the small table near the restrooms 20 minutes ago, prime real estate for monitoring the back exit, the route staff used, and I'd noticed the path Dante always took when leaving. This one was younger, maybe early 30s, with the kind of nervous energy that manifested in constant motion, checking his phone, straightening his silverware, drumming silent rhythms against his thigh. My psychology training had taught me to recognize patterns of behavior, and these 3 men were exhibiting classic pre-action anxiety, elevated breathing, repetitive gestures, hypervigilance, all signs of people preparing for something significant. Maybe I was being paranoid. God knows studying criminal behavior had made me see threats in perfectly innocent situations before. But the coordination of their positioning, the synchronized timing of their movements, the way they all maintained awareness of Table 12 while pretending to focus on their own evening, it set off every alarm I'd learned to trust. Earth to Sophie, Maya's voice cut through my thoughts. Your mysterious Italian is waiting for his usual wine service. I grabbed the bottle of Nebbiolo Dante always ordered, a vintage that cost more than I made in 2 days, and approached Table 12. He looked up as I neared, those storm-gray eyes of his conducting their usual assessment. Everything about Dante Romano was controlled, calculated, from the precise knot of his tie to the way he folded his napkin. 6'2" of carefully contained power wrapped in bespoke Italian wool. Good evening, Mr. Romano, I said, proud that my voice betrayed none of the unease building in my chest. The usual tonight, please. That accent again, definitely European, though I'd never been able to place it exactly. Roman? Sicilian? It carried an undertone of authority that made even simple requests sound like commands. As I poured his wine, I found myself cataloging details about him that I'd been unconsciously collecting for months. The way he always sat with his back to the wall. How his eyes continuously swept the room in careful patterns. The expensive watch on his wrist that he checked with military precision. The subtle bulge beneath his left shoulder that suggested either a very thick wallet or something more concerning. "You seem distracted tonight," he observed, his voice quiet enough that only I could hear. "Something troubling you?" Before I could answer, movement caught my peripheral vision. The man at table 8 had pulled out his phone again, this time speaking in hushed tones. I strained to catch fragments of his conversation as I pretended to examine the wine label. 11:45, he was saying, his voice barely above a whisper, but in the momentary lull of restaurant noise, the words cut through with crystalline clarity. "Back exit. Everything's in position." My blood turned to ice. The scent of my own fierce sweat broke out across my palms, making the wine bottle slick in my grip. 11:45 was exactly 15 minutes away. The back exit was the route Dante always used. And "everything's in position" suggested coordination between multiple parties. The pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. 3 men positioned strategically around the restaurant, all maintaining visual contact with table 12, all operating on the same timeline, all focused on Dante Romano's usual departure routine. I glanced at my watch, 11:30. 15 minutes until what? An ambush? An assassination attempt? Whatever these men were planning, it was scheduled to happen exactly when Dante would be walking toward his car through the back exit. My hands trembled as I finished pouring his wine. Every instinct screamed at me to mind my own business, to finish my shift and go home to my studio apartment where the most dangerous thing I faced was the stack of unpaid bills on my kitchen counter. But I couldn't shake the image of Dante walking unsuspecting into whatever trap was being set. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe my overactive psychology training was reading malice into innocent coincidence. But what if I wasn't? What if those 15 minutes were all that stood between Dante Romano and disaster? "Mr. Romano," I said quietly, leaning forward as if to adjust his place setting. "I might be completely wrong, but I think you should stay quiet and not move. Something's planned for 11:45. His hand stilled on his wine glass, those gray eyes sharpening with sudden focus. For a heartbeat, we existed in a bubble of shared tension while the restaurant continued its oblivious hum around us. "Explain," he said, his voice so low I almost missed it. 3 men, table 8, the bar, and near the restrooms. They've been watching you for the past hour. Coordinated positioning, synchronized timing, pre-action anxiety behaviors." The words tumbled out in a rush of professional terminology mixed with genuine fear. I heard fragments about 11:45 and the back exit. Dante's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a coiling of muscles, a readiness that transformed him from elegant dinner companion to something far more dangerous. "You're certain?" I wasn't certain of anything except the rapid beating of my heart and the cold sweat breaking out across my palms. "No, but yes. Maybe. I study this stuff, behavioral analysis. And everything about them screams surveillance." He reached into his jacket slowly, carefully, and withdrew his phone. A few quick taps, then he set it face down beside his plate. "Done." "What's done?" That ghost of a smile I'd seen before, sharp and predatory. "Insurance." What happened next unfolded with the precision of a military operation, though at the time I could barely process the chaos erupting around me. Dante's phone buzzed once, a response to whatever message he'd sent. Within seconds, 3 men in dark suits materialized from various corners of the restaurant like shadows coming to life. I hadn't even noticed them before, which should have terrified me more than it did. The man at table 8 never saw it coming. One moment he was checking his watch for the 100th time, the next he was face down on his dinner plate with his arm twisted behind his back at an angle that made my stomach lurch. The sharp crack of breaking bone echoed through the restaurant, followed by his muffled scream into the tablecloth. His phone clattered across the marble floor, screen cracked and sparking. The guy at the bar tried to run. Bad choice. He made it exactly 3 steps before disappearing behind a wall of expensive Italian wool and controlled violence. The sound of fists connecting with flesh was sickening, wet and solid at the same time. Other diners looked up from their meals with the mild curiosity of people watching street performers, completely unaware they were witnessing something far more dangerous. The third man, the one near the restrooms, showed more survival instinct. He bolted for the back exit, the same route he'd been monitoring all evening. I lost sight of him in the corridor, but the muffled sounds that echoed back, breaking glass, more impacts, a strangled cry cut short, suggested his escape attempt hadn't been successful. Through it all, Dante remained seated, calmly finishing his wine as if orchestrating tactical takedowns was as routine as ordering dessert. "We need to leave," he said quietly, standing and placing a crisp $100 bill on the table. "Now." "I can't just leave work," I heard myself say, even as my legs threatened to give out beneath me. "My shift isn't. Your shift is over." His hand found the small of my back, steering me toward the main entrance with gentle but absolute authority. "Trust me when I say you don't want to be here when the police arrive to investigate what just happened." My legs felt disconnected from my brain as we walked through the dining room. Carmen caught my eye from across the restaurant, her expression confused as she watched me leave with a customer. I wanted to explain, to tell her I'd call later, but Dante's pace never slowed. Outside, a black sedan waited at the curb with the engine running, exhaust fumes ghosting in the cool October air. Not the kind of coincidence that happened in normal people's lives. "Get in," Dante said, opening the rear door. Every rational thought in my head screamed warnings. This was how people disappeared, how normal lives ended and bodies ended up in rivers. But what choice did I have? I just witnessed what happened to people who crossed Dante Romano, and I was pretty sure refusing his invitation would put me in that category. The interior smelled like leather and expensive cologne with underlying notes of gun oil, a scent I recognized from my criminology classes. Dante slid in beside me, maintaining careful distance while somehow still dominating the space. The driver, a mountain of a man with graying temples, pulled away from the curb without a word. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, proud that my voice only shook slightly. "Somewhere safe while we sort this out." "Sort what out?" "I don't even know what just happened back there." Dante studied me with those storm-gray eyes, calculating something behind their depths. "You saved my life tonight. That tends to complicate things." We drove through Boston's late-night streets in tense silence, the rhythmic thump of road seams beneath the tires marking time like a countdown. I recognized the neighborhoods at first, familiar territory near my apartment building, but as we headed further north, the scenery shifted to areas I knew only from magazines and news reports about the wealthy elite. The safe house turned out to be a penthouse apartment in a gleaming tower that scraped the belly of the night sky. More armed men waited in the lobby, their presence transforming what should have been elegant surroundings into something that felt distinctly like a fortress. "This is temporary," Dante assured me as we rode the private elevator to the 32nd floor, my ears popping with the rapid ascent. "Just until we understand the full scope of tonight's events." The apartment was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city, furniture that belonged in design magazines, art that probably cost more than most people's houses. But it was also clearly a place designed for security rather than comfort. No personal touches, multiple exit routes visible, and the subtle bulges under the jackets of the two men who'd followed us up suggested this was more prison than refuge. "I need to call my job," I said, fishing for my phone. "Maya will be worried, and my manager." "Already handled." A woman appeared from the kitchen area, moving with quiet efficiency. Mid-30s, elegant in an understated way, with intelligent dark eyes that missed nothing. "I spoke with your supervisor an hour ago. You've come down with food poisoning and won't be in for the next few days." I stared at her. "Who are you?" "Isabella Torres, Mr. Romano's assistant." She extended a perfectly manicured hand. "I've prepared the guest room for you, and there are clothes in your size in the closet. If you need anything else, please let me know." "How do you know my size?" That same calculating look I'd seen from Dante. "We're very thorough in our research, Miss Carter." The casual mention of research sent fresh chills through me. How much did they know? How long had they been watching me? And why did I suddenly feel like a specimen under a microscope? Dante had disappeared into another room, an office, judging by the glimpse of computers and communication equipment I caught before the door closed. Isabella gestured for me to follow her down a hallway lined with abstract paintings that probably cost more than my college education. "You must have questions," she said as we walked. "About 1,000 of them. Mr. Romano will answer what he can tomorrow. For tonight, try to rest. It's been an eventful evening." The guest room was larger than my entire apartment, decorated in soothing blues and grays that should have been calming but somehow weren't. Isabella had laid out clothes on the bed, designer labels I recognized from window shopping expeditions I could never afford. "How did you know I'd be coming here?" I asked, fingering the soft fabric of a cashmere sweater. Isabella paused in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Romano is a man who plans for contingencies. He's been aware of you for some time, Miss Carter." "Aware of me? How?" But she was already gone, leaving me alone with questions that multiplied faster than I could process them. I didn't sleep. How could I? Every sound from the hallway made me jump, the soft footsteps of guards changing positions, the distant murmur of voices conducting business I didn't want to know about, the occasional ping of an elevator arriving at our floor. Every distant voice made me wonder if I was about to become another casualty in whatever war I'd stumbled into. By dawn, I'd worn a path in the expensive carpet from pacing, the soft fibers cushioning my bare feet as I tried to process the surreal turn my life had taken. Isabella appeared with coffee and pastries around 8, her efficiency suggesting she'd dealt with traumatized houseguests before. "Mr. Romano would like to speak with you when you're ready," she said, setting the tray on a small table near the windows with the practiced precision of someone who'd performed this ritual many times. "And if I'm not ready?" A slight smile touched her lips. "Then he'll wait. But Miss Carter, the longer you wait, the more questions you'll have, and the fewer answers will satisfy you." She was right, of course. I'd spent the night constructing increasingly elaborate theories about who Dante Romano was and what I'd gotten myself into. None of them were particularly comforting. I found him in the office surrounded by monitors displaying what looked like security feeds from various locations around the city. Traffic cameras, building entrances, what might have been the interior of warehouses or storage facilities. He'd changed from his dinner attire into dark jeans and a white shirt, looking younger and somehow more dangerous in casual clothes, his hair slightly mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it while reviewing whatever intelligence filled those screens. "Sleep well?" he asked without turning from the screens. "Did you expect me to?" That ghost of a smile. "No, but I hoped." He swiveled to face me, those gray eyes conducting their usual assessment. "How much do you know about organized crime syndicates in Boston, Sophie?" The use of my first name sent an unexpected flutter through my chest. "Only what everyone knows. That it exists. That people get hurt. That normal people try to stay as far away from it as possible. Smart policy. Unfortunately, no longer an option for you. Because I saved your life? Because you witnessed Marcus Valenti attempting to have me killed? And because your intervention allowed my men to capture 2 of his people alive?" Dante stood, moving to pour coffee from a service I hadn't noticed, the rich aroma filling the office and mixing with the subtle scent of his cologne. "Valenti will assume you're working with me. That makes you a target." The casual way he delivered this death sentence made my knees weak. "For how long?" "Until Valenti is no longer a problem." "And how long will that take?" Dante handed me a cup of coffee, his fingers brushing mine briefly, sending an electric jolt through my system that had nothing to do with fear. "That depends on how smart he is, and how quickly he realizes his war with my organization was always going to end only one way." Organization. The word carried weight I was only beginning to understand. The next few days blurred into a strange routine. I woke in the luxurious guest room, ate breakfast prepared by Isabella or delivered by silent staff who never met my eyes, and spent long hours trying to process my new reality. The penthouse was beautiful but suffocating, a gilded cage 40 stories above the ground. By the 3rd day, I'd worked myself into such a state of anxious energy that I decided to test the boundaries of my captivity. I need some air, I told Isabella, who was reviewing something on her tablet in the living room. Maybe a walk around the building? Her expression remained perfectly neutral. I'm afraid that's not possible at the moment. Then maybe the lobby, just to feel like I'm not completely trapped. Miss Carter, I understand this is difficult, but... No, you don't understand. The words exploded out of me with more force than I'd intended, months of student debt and grief over my mother's death, and now this impossible situation all converging into a breaking point. You don't understand what it's like to have your entire life turned upside down because you tried to do the right thing. You don't understand what it's like to be told you're a target for murder because you warned someone about an assassination attempt. And you definitely don't understand what it's like to be imprisoned in a golden cage by the same person you saved. Isabella absorbed my outburst without flinching, her composure intact. You're right. I don't understand those specific circumstances. But I do understand being caught between impossible choices and dangerous people. Something in her tone made me look at her more carefully. Really look, past the professional demeanor and expensive clothes. Her eyes held shadows that spoke of experiences she'd never share, of decisions that had cost her more than she'd ever admit. How long have you worked for him? 7 years. And in those 7 years, how many people like me have you had to accommodate? A slight smile touched her lips. You're the first. That should have made me feel special. Instead, it made me feel like an experiment, like Dante was trying to figure out what to do with the civilian who'd accidentally saved his life and complicated his carefully controlled world. Sunday brought a second panic attack and my first escape attempt. I waited until I heard Isabella leave for what she called her weekly errands, then made my move. The guards at the front entrance were positioned to watch for people coming in, not necessarily for residents going out. If I moved with confidence, dressed appropriately in some of the expensive clothes Isabella had provided, maybe I could simply walk past them like I belonged there. I made it exactly 3 floors down in the elevator before it stopped between floors. The lights dimmed, then came back up, and when the doors opened again, one of Dante's men was waiting for me, a younger guy I'd seen around the penthouse, with kind eyes that looked almost apologetic. Miss Carter, he said politely, as if encountering me in an elevator between floors was perfectly normal. Mr. Romano asked me to escort you back to the apartment. The shame of being caught trying to escape burned hotter than the fear. I'd acted like a frightened child instead of the educated woman I was supposed to be. But what choice did I have? Sit quietly and wait for someone to decide my fate? Dante returned that evening, his presence filling the apartment with energy that made my skin prickle with awareness. He'd changed from his morning suit into dark jeans and a black sweater, looking younger and somehow more dangerous in casual clothes, a faint shadow of stubble darkening his jaw. I hear you had an eventful day, he said, pouring himself a glass of whiskey from a crystal decanter, the liquid catching the last rays of sunset through the windows. Heat flooded my cheeks. I needed some air. And you thought wandering Boston alone while Marcus Valenti has a price on your head was a good way to get it? I thought maybe I could go back to my normal life and pretend none of this happened. He turned to face me, those steel-gray eyes conducting their usual assessment. Your normal life ended Friday night when you chose to warn me instead of minding your own business. So I'm being punished for doing the right thing? You're being protected because doing the right thing put you in the crosshairs of very dangerous people. The rational part of my brain understood the logic. But the emotional part, the part that felt like a prisoner despite the luxury surroundings, wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. Tell me about your mother, Dante said suddenly, the apparent non sequitur catching me off guard. What about her? Isabella mentioned she passed away recently. The medical bills that forced you to take the waitressing job. I wrapped my arms around myself, the familiar grief settling over me like a heavy blanket, memories of hospital rooms and false hope flooding back. Lung cancer. 3 years of treatments, surgeries, experimental therapies. None of it worked, but it bankrupted our family trying. By the end, we were selling everything we owned just to pay for one more round of treatment that might buy her another month. That's why you studied criminal psychology. You wanted to understand the people who prey on vulnerable families. The insight caught me off guard. I'd never articulated it that way, but there was truth in his words. Insurance companies aren't technically criminals, but they destroy lives just the same. I wanted to understand how people could be so cruel in the face of suffering. How they could make decisions that killed people and still sleep at night. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the edges, a recognition of shared pain. My mother died when I was 15. Poisoned by someone we trusted, someone who ate at our table, who my father considered family. The quiet admission hung in the air between us. Vulnerability offered like a gift I wasn't sure I deserved to receive. A business associate, he continued, his voice carrying no emotion, but his knuckles were white where they gripped his glass. My father's cousin. He'd been selling information to rival organizations for years, but we never suspected until it was too late. She suffered for 3 days before she died. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong until the autopsy revealed the arsenic in her system. "I'm sorry," I whispered, inadequate words for unspeakable pain. It taught me never to trust anyone completely. And it taught me to recognize the signs of betrayal before they become fatal. Your intervention Friday night wasn't just good instincts. You saw patterns of behavior that trained killers tried to hide. That's not a skill you learn waitressing tables. Understanding dawned. That's why you need someone who can read people. Someone who can spot the tells that most people miss. Exactly. I found myself studying his face the way I'd been trained to study subjects in my criminology classes. The controlled expression that never quite concealed the pain underneath. The careful posture that spoke of constant vigilance. The way his eyes continuously swept the room, even in his own home, always calculating threats and exits. You don't trust anyone, do you? Trust is a luxury I can't afford. That sounds like a lonely way to live. For a moment, something raw and honest flickered across his features. Loneliness is better than betrayal. At least when you're alone, you know exactly what threats you're facing. That night, sleep eluded me completely. I lay in the expensive sheets, staring at the ceiling and watching the patterns of light from the city below shift across the plaster, processing the conversation with Dante, trying to reconcile the dangerous criminal with the grieving 15-year-old who'd watched his mother die from poison administered by family. At 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and padded to the kitchen in search of water. The apartment was dark except for city lights filtering through the massive windows, creating patterns of light and shadow across the marble floors. I wasn't alone. Dante stood at the kitchen island, fully dressed despite the late hour, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. Steam rose from 2 cups sitting on the granite counter, and the rich aroma of coffee filled the air, not the typical American blend, but something deeper, more complex. Couldn't sleep either, he asked without turning around. Too much to process. He handed me one of the cups. Perfect espresso in delicate china. It's an old family recipe. My mother used to make it when I had nightmares. Dark Italian roast with a hint of cardamom and orange peel. The gesture was so unexpectedly intimate that it caught me off guard. This wasn't the calculated crime boss or the controlled businessman. This was just a man sharing something precious from his past, a memory of the mother he'd lost too young. We stood in comfortable silence, drinking coffee in the soft glow of city lights. For the first time since Friday night, I felt something other than fear or anger, something that might have been understanding, or the beginning of trust. The men who killed her, I said quietly. What happened to them? My father handled it when I turned 18. All of them. It took 3 years to track down everyone involved in the conspiracy. Dante's smile in the darkness was sharp as broken glass. The cousin, that one was mine. Father gave him to me as a birthday present. I should have been horrified. Any normal person would have been. But standing there in the darkness with this man who'd saved my life as surely as I'd saved his, I found I understood the need for closure, even if the form it took was violent and final. 2 weeks of living in Dante's gilded cage had taught me the subtle rhythms of his world. The way conversations stopped when he entered rooms, picking up again only when he gave permission with a subtle nod. How grown men twice my size deferred to his quiet authority, their voices dropping to respectful murmurs in his presence. The careful dance of power that played out in gestures too small for outsiders to notice but too significant for insiders to ignore. The way people stood when he arrived, the precise distance they maintained, the hierarchy expressed in seating arrangements and the order in which people spoke. When he finally agreed to let me return to the silver spoon, it came with conditions that made my previous captivity seem like freedom. "Vincent will drive you to and from work," Dante explained over breakfast on the terrace, his tone suggesting this wasn't negotiable. "Lucas will be positioned within the restaurant at all times. You don't leave the building during your shift, not even for smoke breaks." I stirred sugar into my coffee, watching the crystals dissolve while processing the implications. "What about Maya? She'll ask questions about the bodyguard. Lucas knows how to blend in. Your coworkers will assume he's a customer who prefers to eat alone. We've created a complete background for him." Anthony Chen, software developer, recently divorced, finds eating at home too depressing. The plan was more complex than I'd realized. Dante had purchased a controlling interest in the restaurant 2 days earlier, a fact he mentioned as casually as commenting on the weather. My salary had mysteriously tripled, officially a promotion to guest relations specialist. My schedule had been reduced to 3 nights a week. And suddenly there were openings for additional security personnel disguised as wait staff, kitchen workers, even a new sommelier who I suspected could kill a man with a corkscrew if necessary. "You bought the restaurant to protect me?" "I bought the restaurant because it made strategic sense. The location is ideal for monitoring several key areas of the city. The customer base includes people I need to keep track of, and the previous owner was overextended and eager to sell. Your protection is a secondary benefit." Even his acts of care came wrapped in emotional distance, as if admitting he'd done something purely for my benefit would reveal a weakness he couldn't afford. Walking back into the silver spoon felt like returning to a museum of my former life. Everything looked exactly the same. The marble floors I'd mopped countless times, the soft lighting I'd adjusted for romantic ambience, the elegant table settings I could prep in my sleep. But I moved through it like a ghost haunting familiar spaces, no longer quite belonging to this world but not yet fully part of Dante's either. Maya hugged me with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely missed me, asking about my supposed food poisoning with enough concern to make guilt twist in my stomach. "You look different," she observed as we prepped for the dinner service, her sharp eyes taking in details I'd hoped would go unnoticed. "Rested, like you've been somewhere expensive." "Just catching up on sleep?" She studied my face with the sharp attention of someone who'd known me long enough to spot lies. "And the manicure, the subtle highlights, those clothes, Sophie, that's a designer blouse. I've seen it in Vogue. Food poisoning doesn't usually come with spa treatments and a complete wardrobe upgrade." Heat crept up my neck. Isabella had arranged both without asking, part of what she called maintaining appropriate appearances for someone in Mr. Romano's circle. I'd been too emotionally drained to object, but now the evidence of luxury felt like a betrayal of who I used to be. "My sister surprised me with a girls' weekend," I lied, hating how easily deception came now, wondering who I was becoming. She felt bad about how hard I'd been working and wanted to treat me. Maya's expression suggested she didn't entirely buy it, but she let it drop, turning her attention to the evening's reservations. Lucas arrived at 7, claiming the corner table with clear sight lines to both entrances and the kitchen corridor. He ordered methodically, appetizer, main course, dessert, eating slowly enough to justify his presence for the entire evening but not so slowly as to attract attention. Other patrons ignored him completely, which spoke to his skill at appearing invisible while remaining hypervigilant, his eyes constantly scanning the room in patterns I recognized from my own training. Dante didn't come that first night, or the second. By the third evening, I'd convinced myself he'd lost interest in his restaurant acquisition and returned to whatever criminal enterprises normally occupied his attention, that I was just another asset to be managed and eventually forgotten. I was wrong. He appeared during Thursday's dinner rush, claiming his usual table with the quiet authority that made wait staff scramble to accommodate him. But something was different. His usual calm composure carried an edge of tension, visible in the tight set of his shoulders and the more frequent sweeps his eyes made of the restaurant. "Good evening, Mr. Romano," I said, approaching with the wine he always ordered, my heart doing that familiar flutter despite everything I'd learned about who he was. "Sophie." The way he said my name sent familiar shivers down my spine. Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Anyone asking questions about your schedule? The questions sparked immediate alarm. What kind of questions? The kind that suggests someone's been watching you. I thought back over the past few days, mentally cataloging interactions with customers, delivery drivers, the new dishwasher who'd been hired last week, even the homeless man who sometimes lingered near the employee entrance. There was a guy yesterday, said he was from the city health department. Asked about employee schedules and shift changes, but Maya handled most of it. He seemed more interested in the restaurant layout than actual health codes, spent a lot of time looking at the exits. Dante's expression darkened, that controlled mask slipping just enough to reveal genuine concern. Describe him. Mid-30s, expensive suit, Armani, I think, slight accent I couldn't place. Mexican, maybe? He had a scar through his left eyebrow and kept checking his phone like he was expecting an important call. Mexican? The specific question sent ice through my veins. Maybe. Why? Who is he? Instead of answering, Dante pulled out his phone and typed a quick message, his fingers moving with practiced speed. Within minutes, Lucas appeared at our table, his casual dining facade abandoned, all pretense of being a lonely software developer gone. We need to leave, Dante said quietly, standing with fluid grace that didn't match the urgency in his voice. Now. I can't just abandon my shift. There are tables. Maya will understand when she realizes your life is more important than serving dinner. Move. Now. The parking lot behind the Silver Spoon was poorly lit, shadows pooling between the few working street lights like spilled ink. We'd made it halfway to Dante's car when the first shot shattered the rear window of a sedan parked 3 spaces away, safety glass exploding inward with a sound like breaking ice. Time fractured into crystalline moments of terror and precision. Dante's hand closed around my wrist, pulling me behind a delivery truck as more shots rang out, the sharp cracks echoing off brick walls. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled my nostrils, mixing with the scent of garbage from nearby dumpsters and the metallic tang of adrenaline flooding my system. Lucas appeared from nowhere, returning fire with the calm efficiency of someone for whom gunfights were routine occupational hazards, his movements economical and precise. Stay down, Dante commanded, his body shielding mine as he drew his own weapon, a detail that should have terrified me but somehow didn't. His heartbeat was rapid against my back, the only sign that he was as human as I was. In that moment, surrounded by violence and chaos and the very real possibility of death, his presence felt like the only safe harbor in a storm designed to destroy me. The firefight lasted maybe 90 seconds, though it felt like hours. When silence finally returned, punctuated only by the distant wail of sirens and the hiss of a punctured tire, 3 bodies lay motionless in the parking lot, dark pools spreading beneath them. The metallic scent of blood mixed with the smell of gunpowder and garbage, creating an odor I knew I'd never forget. Lucas was speaking rapidly into his earpiece while checking the perimeter for additional threats, his gun still raised and ready. Are you hurt? Dante's hands moved over me with professional thoroughness, checking for wounds I hadn't realized I might have sustained, his touch clinical despite the intimacy of the moment. I don't think so. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant and hollow, like it belonged to someone else. Were they trying to kill me? They were trying to take you. Very different objective. Dead, you're worthless to Marcus. Alive and in his hands, you're leverage. The distinction should have been comforting. Instead, it opened up terrifying possibilities about what capture might have involved, torture for information I didn't have, or worse, being used as bait to lure Dante into a trap. Vincent arrived with backup vehicles and a cleanup crew that worked with the unsettling efficiency of people who'd handled similar situations before. Within 20 minutes, the bodies were gone, wrapped in plastic and loaded into a van that would take them to a destination I didn't want to know about. The blood was washed away with industrial cleaner and sawdust. The damaged vehicles were towed. And the parking lot looked like nothing more dramatic had occurred than the usual dinner rush. Dante's house was a sanctuary of controlled elegance after the chaos of the attempted kidnapping. He led me to the living room, the soft lighting a stark contrast to the violence we'd just escaped. He poured whiskey with hands that remained perfectly steady despite what we'd just survived, the crystal decanter chiming softly against the glass. This was Marcus's response to losing his men at the restaurant, he explained, settling beside me on the leather sofa, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He's formed an alliance with the Gulf Cartel. They have different methods than traditional organized crime families, more violent, more willing to involve civilians. My world has rules, boundaries that even enemies respect. Cartels operate with fewer constraints. They see you as nothing more than a tool to hurt me. The whiskey burned going down, but it helped steady my nerves, the warmth spreading through my chest. So what happens now? Now we eliminate the threat before it escalates further. His matter-of-fact tone suggested this was merely another business problem requiring a straightforward solution. But the way his free hand rested on my knee, thumb tracing small circles through the fabric of my dress, suggested his concern went deeper than strategic calculations. Dante. Yes? Thank you for saving me. The words felt inadequate for what had just happened, for the way he'd positioned his body between me and bullets without hesitation. He set down his glass and turned to face me fully, those steel-gray eyes searching my face with an intensity that made breathing difficult. You saved me first. This is simply returning the favor. Is that all this is? Professional courtesy? Something shifted in his expression, the careful control slipping just enough to reveal the man beneath the crime boss persona, someone capable of caring, of vulnerability, of fear at the thought of loss. When he leaned forward, I didn't pull away. When his hand cupped my face with exquisite gentleness, I leaned into the touch. And when his lips found mine, I finally understood why I'd never felt truly safe with anyone else. The kiss was nothing like the romance novels I'd read as a teenager, with their gentle explorations and tentative discoveries. There was no gentle exploration, no tentative building of passion. This was hunger and desperation and the recognition of something that had been building between us since that first night at the restaurant, the acknowledgement that we'd both been walking toward this moment from the second our eyes met. His hands moved to my hair, pulling me closer as his tongue swept against mine. I tasted whiskey and something darker, more primal. My own hands found the buttons of his shirt, fingers fumbling with urgency that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with need. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against mine, his breath warm against my lips. This complicates things, he said quietly, but his hands were already pulling me closer, contradicting his words. Everything about my life is already complicated. Not like this. Not when caring about you gives my enemies another way to hurt me. Not when every decision I make has to account for your safety as well as my own. The admission hung in the air between us, vulnerable and honest in a way I'd never expected from him, a man who'd built his empire on never showing weakness. Then maybe we don't let them, I whispered, my fingers tracing the line of his jaw, feeling the stubble rasp against my skin. His smile was sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. No. Maybe we don't. He stood, pulling me with him, and led me through the apartment to his bedroom, a space I'd glimpsed but never entered. It was surprisingly sparse compared to the rest of the penthouse, decorated in deep grays and blacks with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The bed was massive, covered in what looked like expensive silk sheets. Are you sure about this? He asked, his hands on my waist but not pushing, not demanding. Once we cross this line, Sophie, there's no going back to what we were before. I thought about the waitress I'd been just weeks ago, worried about rent and tips and whether my degree would ever lead anywhere meaningful. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone who'd existed in a different life. I haven't wanted to go back since the moment I warned you about those men, I said honestly. Maybe even before that. Maybe from the first night you sat at table 12 and looked at me like I was more than just someone bringing you wine. Something fierce and possessive flared in his eyes. You were never just someone bringing me wine. From that first night, you were the woman who saw through every defense I'd built, who looked at me and saw past the armor to something I'd forgotten existed. Then his mouth was on mine again, and we stopped talking. We made love with the desperate intensity of people who'd been denied something essential for too long. Every touch was a confession, every kiss a promise neither of us was sure we could keep. His hands mapped my body with reverent attention, finding places that made me gasp and arch into him. When he finally moved over me, I felt more complete than I had since my mother died, like I'd found something I didn't know was missing. In that moment, surrounded by the trappings of his dangerous world, Dante wasn't a crime boss or a ruthless businessman. He was just a man who'd found something worth protecting beyond his own power, someone who whispered my name like a prayer and held me like I might disappear if he loosened his grip. Afterward, as we lay entwined on the silk sheets, his fingers tracing lazy patterns across my bare shoulder, I felt safer than I had since childhood. The city lights cast shifting shadows across the ceiling, and somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, a reminder of the world we inhabited, dangerous and unforgiving. "Stay tonight," he said quietly, his breath warm against my temple. "I'm not going anywhere." I pressed closer, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath my palm. But morning brought harsh realities that passion couldn't erase. Isabella knocked at 7 with coffee and the grim expression that meant trouble, her usual composure strained in a way I'd never seen before. "We have a situation," she said, handing Dante a tablet displaying security footage, her voice tight with controlled tension. I watched his face harden as he studied the images, the tender lover from hours ago disappearing behind the armor of the crime lord. The transformation was complete and terrifying, a reminder of who he really was beneath the gentleness he showed me. "What is it?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know, wanted to stay in the bubble of safety we'd created in the darkness. "Marcus has your apartment under surveillance," Dante said, his voice cold and controlled, all warmth vanished. "2 men in the building across the street with high-powered cameras and listening equipment, another in a van parked on your block that's been there for 3 days. He's mapping your routine, identifying anyone who visits, looking for vulnerabilities he can exploit." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. "So I can never go home?" "Not until this is resolved." His eyes met mine, and I saw genuine regret there, mixed with determination. "Your landlord will receive notice that you're breaking your lease for a family emergency. My men will pack up your belongings and move them to storage. Anything that can identify you or be used to track you will be sanitized." "And when will that be? When can I have my life back?" His silence was answer enough. The next 2 weeks blurred into a strange new normal that felt both surreal and oddly domestic. Days spent in Dante's penthouse, nights at the Silver Spoon under constant guard, my old life becoming a memory that belonged to someone else. My old apartment was emptied, my belongings catalogued and stored in a facility I'd never seen. The Sophie who worried about rent and tips and whether her degree would ever lead to a real career felt like a stranger, someone I'd left behind in a life I could never return to. Maya noticed the changes, how could she not? The designer clothes Isabella insisted I wear, the way Lucas appeared wherever I went like a well-dressed shadow, the protective way Dante watched me when he came to the restaurant, his eyes following my every movement with possessive intensity. "You're sleeping with him, aren't you?" she asked one night as we closed up, her voice carefully neutral but her eyes concerned. There was no judgment in her voice, just curiosity and maybe a hint of concern from someone who genuinely cared about my well-being. I could have denied it, maintained the fiction that Dante was just another customer, that the tripled salary and constant bodyguards were just coincidences. But I was tired of lying to one of the few friends I had left, tired of pretending to be someone I was no longer. "It's complicated," I said finally, wiping down the bar with more force than necessary. "It always is with men like that." She squeezed my hand, her touch warm and grounding. "Just be careful, Sophie. Men like Dante Romano, they live in a world where people get hurt, where violence is currency and loyalty is purchased with blood. I don't want you to be one of them. I don't want to lose you to that world." Her words haunted me as Vincent drove me back to the penthouse through streets slick with October rain, the city lights reflecting off wet pavement like scattered jewels. Was I being careful? Or was I falling in love with someone whose world would eventually destroy me, consume me until there was nothing left of the woman I'd been? The answer came sooner than I expected. Friday night, Dante didn't come to dinner, which wasn't unusual. He had other businesses to attend to, other matters that required his attention. But Isabella called at 9 with instructions to close the restaurant early and return immediately, the tension in her voice sending alarm bells ringing through my entire system. What's happened? I demanded as Vincent drove through Boston streets at speeds that would have terrified me weeks ago but now felt routine. Mr. Romano will explain when we arrive, was all he would say, his jaw tight, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The penthouse was filled with men in dark suits, all carrying weapons they didn't bother to conceal, a breach of protocol that spoke to the severity of whatever had occurred. The air crackled with barely contained violence, with the anticipation of people preparing for war. Dante stood at the windows overlooking the city, his posture rigid with tension I'd never seen before, even during the shooting. When he turned to face me, something in his expression made my knees weak, a combination of rage and fear that transformed his features into something almost feral. "Marcus kidnapped my sister," he said without preamble, each word clipped and cold. 2 hours ago, as she left her yoga class in Cambridge. "He's demanding a trade, her for you." The world tilted sideways, the room spinning as I processed his words. "You have a sister?" "Olivia. 23, studying art history at Harvard. I've kept her separate from this life, protected her from what I do, maintained the fiction that she's just another college student from a wealthy family." His hands clenched into fists at his sides, the only outward sign of the emotion roiling beneath his controlled exterior. "Until tonight. Until Marcus decided that the best way to hurt me was through her. Then we make the trade," I heard myself say, the words emerging with more confidence than I felt. "You get your sister back, and Marcus gets what he wants. It's simple." "No." The word cracked through the room like a gunshot, making several of the assembled men flinch. "Dante, she's your sister, your family. And you're mine." He crossed the room in 3 strides, gripping my shoulders with barely controlled intensity, his fingers digging into my flesh hard enough to bruise. "I don't trade the people I care about. Not for Marcus, not for anyone. Not ever." "Then what do we do?" My voice came out as a whisper, overwhelmed by the fierce protectiveness in his eyes. His smile was all sharp edges and cold calculation, the predator emerging fully from behind the businessman's mask. "We go to war." The unexpected twist, Isabella's betrayal revealed. The plan was insane, but Dante explained it with the calm precision of someone orchestrating a business merger rather than a military assault. They'd traced Olivia to a warehouse in South Boston, heavily guarded by Marcus's men and his cartel allies. A frontal assault would get Olivia killed. So instead, they'd use the one thing Marcus wanted most, me. "Absolutely not," I said when I understood what he was proposing, my voice rising with panic. "You're not using me as bait. I'm not trained for this, I'm a waitress with a psychology degree, not some action hero." "You'll be protected every second," Dante insisted, his hands framing my face, forcing me to meet his eyes. "Lucas, Vincent, and 6 of my best men will be positioned throughout the area. Marcus thinks he's winning, that he's forced my hand, and I'm desperate enough to make a stupid mistake. He won't expect us to turn his trap against him. And if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong." But the way his jaw tightened, the flicker of doubt in his eyes, told me he wasn't as certain as he claimed. Before I could argue further, Isabella stepped forward from where she'd been standing in the shadows, and I noticed something I'd missed in my panic. The way she held herself wasn't just efficient anymore, it was military. The way her hand rested near her waist wasn't casual, it was tactical. And the expression on her face was something I'd never seen before, conflict warring with determination. "There's something you need to understand," Isabella said, her voice different now, harder, more authoritative than I'd ever heard it. "About who I really am. About what's really happening here." Dante's jaw clenched, his entire body going rigid. "Isabella. She deserves to know the truth before what happens next," Isabella cut him off, her dark eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "My real name is Isabella Valenti. Marcus is my brother." The world tilted sideways, the room spinning as comprehension crashed over me like a wave. "What?" "I've been working undercover in Dante's organization for 7 years, she continued, her voice carrying no emotion, but I could see the micro-expressions of genuine conflict playing across her features, the tells my training had taught me to recognize. Feeding information to Marcus, helping him build his power base, positioning myself as Dante's most trusted advisor so I could be there when Marcus was ready to make his move. Tonight was supposed to be the endgame. Marcus kidnaps Olivia, forces a trade for you, and when Dante brings his entire security team to the rescue, Marcus wipes them all out in one coordinated strike. It was perfect. It was foolproof. My psychology training kicked in even through the shock. I studied her face, looking for the tells that would indicate deception, the micro-expressions that betrayed hidden truth. But what I saw instead made my stomach drop: genuine conflict, the war between loyalty and conscience playing out in real time across features she could no longer fully control. "So why are you telling us this?" Dante asked, his voice dangerously quiet, his hand moving subtly toward the weapon I knew he carried. "Why not just let it play out?" Isabella's composure cracked, just slightly, like ice fracturing under pressure. "Because 7 years ago, I watched my brother transform from someone I loved into a monster I don't recognize. Because working with you showed me there are different kinds of power, the kind that destroys everything it touches, and the kind that protects what it values. And because..." She glanced at me, something raw flickering across her features, "because you trusted me when no one else would. When my own family had already written me off as weak and useless, good for nothing except being married off to strengthen alliances." "This could be a trap," Dante said, but I heard the uncertainty in his voice, saw the way he was calculating probabilities and risks. "It could be," Isabella agreed, meeting his eyes steadily. "But it's not. Marcus has Olivia at the warehouse in South Boston, Building 47 on Harbor Street. He's expecting you to bring Sophie, exactly like I told him you would, because you're predictable when it comes to protecting people you care about. He has 50 men positioned throughout the building, including a sniper team on the roof and another in the building across the street. The moment your vehicles enter the kill zone, a 3-block radius around the warehouse, they open fire. No negotiation, no trade, just total annihilation." The betrayal should have destroyed Dante. 7 years of placing trust in someone who'd been working against him the entire time. But instead, I watched him process the information with the same controlled precision he applied to everything, emotions locked away behind layers of protective armor. "Why now?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Why not let it play out? Why betray your brother after 7 years of loyalty?" Isabella's eyes found mine again, and I saw genuine pain there, the cost of the choice she was making. "Because I've spent 7 years watching you build something that actually means something, an organization that protects its people instead of consuming them. And I've spent the last 3 months watching Sophie remind you what it's like to care about something beyond power and revenge. I've watched you become someone my brother will never be again, someone capable of love instead of just violence. I won't be responsible for destroying that." The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications and unspoken consequences. Finally, Dante spoke, each word measured and deliberate. "If you're lying, if this is part of some elaborate scheme." "If I'm lying, you'll kill me," Isabella said simply, no fear in her voice, just acceptance. "I'm counting on it. But I'm not lying, Dante. For the first time in 7 years, I'm telling the complete truth. And it terrifies me more than death ever could." Dante turned to his men, decision made with the rapid calculation I'd come to recognize. Change of plans. Climax with enhanced personal stakes and Marcus development. The warehouse assault happened at midnight, but not the way Marcus expected. Using Isabella's intelligence, Dante's team came through the underground maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the industrial district, neutralizing the sniper positions first with silent precision. They moved like shadows given form, each step choreographed, each movement economical and deadly. I rode with Dante despite his protests, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might break through. The smell of damp concrete and rust filled my nostrils as we moved through the tunnels, mixing with the acrid scent of my own fierce sweat. The sound of dripping water echoed in the darkness, each drop marking time like a countdown to violence. Isabella moved ahead of us, her betrayal of Marcus evident in every careful gesture as she guided us through passages she'd helped plan for our ambush. The irony wasn't lost on me, she was leading us through the very trap she'd helped set. When we breached the warehouse floor through a service entrance Isabella had left unlocked, chaos erupted with the sound of shattering glass and shouted warnings. But this time, Dante's men had the element of surprise. Marcus's forces, positioned for an ambush that never came from the expected direction, found themselves caught in a crossfire of their own making. I found Olivia tied to a chair in the center of the warehouse, positioned under a spotlight like some macabre theater production. But her eyes weren't frightened, they were defiant, filled with the same steel I'd seen in her brother. As Lucas cut her free, his knife slicing through the zip ties with practiced efficiency, I scanned the catwalks for Marcus. He emerged from the shadows above us, flanked by guards carrying assault rifles, his polished appearance and cold eyes exactly as I'd imagined. But what caught my attention was the way he moved, the same efficient grace I'd seen in Isabella, the family resemblance undeniable in the set of his shoulders and the tilt of his head. Isabella. Marcus's voice rang out across the warehouse, amplified by the echoing space and raw with genuine pain. I know you're here. I know you betrayed me. I can smell your perfume from here, the same one Mother wore. She stepped into view, positioning herself between Marcus and Dante with deliberate calculation. I did. After everything I did for you, Marcus spat, and I heard genuine pain crack through his cold facade, a brother's hurt layered beneath the crime lord's rage. After I protected you when father wanted to marry you off to that Colombian bastard who would have beaten you like he beat his first 3 wives. After I gave you purpose when everyone else saw you as worthless, as nothing more than a breeding mare for alliance babies. After I made you my right hand when our brothers laughed and said a woman could never be trusted with real power. You gave me purpose. Isabella's laugh was bitter, edged with years of suppressed pain. You used me as a weapon, Marcus. There's a difference. You sent me into Dante's organization not because you trusted my abilities, but because you thought he'd underestimate me. You became exactly what we swore we'd never be, exactly like father. Exactly like the man who beat mother until she stopped crying, until she stopped feeling anything at all. The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow, his body jerking back as if she'd struck him. For a moment, I saw past the crime lord to the brother underneath, someone who'd lost his way trying to protect what he loved and couldn't find his way back. The micro-expressions playing across his face told a story my training helped me read: grief, rage, denial, and underneath it all, the terrible recognition that she might be right. I am nothing like him, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction, the words hollow. You're wearing his ring, Isabella pointed out, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. You're running his organization using his methods. You're making the same choices that turned him into a monster. Tell me, Marcus, when did you start enjoying the violence? When did power become more important than protecting what we loved? But the moment of vulnerability passed, shuttered behind the armor of a man who'd gone too far down a dark path to turn back. Marcus raised his gun, pointing it not at Dante or his men, but at Isabella, his sister, his co-conspirator, the one person who'd stood by him for 7 years. If I can't have your loyalty, sister, I'll have your life. At least in death, you can't betray me again. Marcus, don't, Isabella started, her voice breaking. Dante moved faster than I'd ever seen, his shot precise and devastating, the crack of the gunshot echoing through the warehouse like thunder. Marcus stumbled backward, surprise replacing rage in his expression, his gun clattering to the metal catwalk. He hit the railing, and for a heartbeat, he seemed suspended there, balanced between standing and falling. Isabella, he said, his voice suddenly young, frightened, a boy calling for his sister instead of a crime lord facing death. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I became him. I'm sorry I failed you. Then he fell, the sound of impact echoing through the sudden silence that descended like a physical presence. Isabella ran to the railing, looking down at her brother's broken form on the concrete below, and I saw her shoulders shake with sobs she'd been holding back for 7 years. The grief was visceral, raw, mourning not just the man who'd fallen, but the boy he'd been before power corrupted him, before violence became the only language he spoke. Dante found me behind a concrete pillar where Lucas had positioned me for protection, pulling me into his arms with an intensity that bordered on desperation. Are you hurt? No. I looked past him to where Isabella stood alone, mourning the brother she'd had to betray to stop. But I think she is. Physical wounds heal, Dante said quietly, following my gaze. That kind of pain, that stays with you forever. Olivia appeared, supported by Lucas, looking shaken but defiant, her resemblance to Dante striking in the harsh warehouse lighting. You must be Sophie, she said, extending a hand despite everything she'd just been through, her grip surprisingly strong. I've heard a lot about you. You have? She glanced at her brother with amusement that seemed surreal given the circumstances. Dante doesn't shut up about you. It's actually kind of annoying. I've heard more about your behavioral analysis skills than I ever needed to know. Heat flooded my cheeks, but before I could respond, Vincent called out a warning, his voice cutting through the moment. Police sirens. 2 minutes out. We evacuated the warehouse like smoke dissipating, leaving behind only bodies and questions that would never be fully answered, evidence that would lead nowhere. By the time police arrived with lights flashing and radios crackling, we were miles away, disappearing into Boston's pre-dawn streets like we'd never been there at all. Epilogue, 6 months later. The sun was rising as we returned to the penthouse, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed incongruous with the violence we'd just survived. Olivia immediately claimed the guest room I'd been using, announcing she needed a shower and possibly therapy, maybe in that order. Isabella disappeared into her own quarters, leaving me alone with Dante as the first light of morning crept across the marble floors. We stood at the windows, watching the city wake up to a day that was fundamentally different from the one before. Somewhere down there, people were getting coffee, heading to work, living normal lives untouched by the violence that had just reshaped our world. Marcus had connections to 3 other organizations, Dante said quietly, his arm around my waist anchoring me to reality. With him gone, they'll either fall in line or start a war for territory. Either way, things are going to be unstable for a while. Blood creates power vacuums, and vacuums attract ambitious people willing to do anything to fill them. Meaning I'm still not safe? Meaning you're safer than before, but not completely clear. It'll take time for the dust to settle, for the new order to establish itself. He turned to face me, his expression more vulnerable than I'd ever seen it, the morning light casting shadows across features I'd come to love. I'm giving you a choice, Sophie. I can set you up somewhere far from Boston, Seattle, maybe, or Portland. New identity, new life, enough money that you'd never have to worry about rent or medical bills again. You'll be safe, protected, but you'll have to leave everything behind, your name, your history, any chance of the life you thought you'd have. Or you stay. With me. In this life, with all its dangers and complications and the constant threat of violence. I can't promise it will be easy or safe. But I can promise I'll protect you with everything I have, that I'll value your life above my own, that I'll never stop fighting to keep you safe. My heart hammered against my ribs as I processed the choice he was offering. This was it, the moment where I decided what kind of person I was going to be, what kind of life I wanted to live. The safe choice was obvious, take the new identity, start over somewhere quiet where the most dangerous thing I'd face was maybe an aggressive squirrel or a parking ticket. But when I looked at Dante, really looked at him, past the danger and the violence and the impossible complications, I saw the man who'd shared his mother's coffee recipe at 3 in the morning. Who'd risked everything to save both me and his sister. Who'd shown me parts of himself he'd kept hidden from the world, vulnerabilities he'd never revealed to anyone else. Who'd made me feel more alive in a few weeks than I had in years of playing it safe. I'm not going anywhere, I said finally, the words emerging with more confidence than I felt. His smile was brilliant and relieved and tinged with something that might have been love, transforming his features from dangerous to beautiful. You're sure? No, I admitted honestly. I'm terrified. But I'm also certain that walking away from you would be the biggest mistake of my life. You make me feel seen in a way no one else ever has. Like I matter for who I am, not just what I can do for you. He pulled me into his arms, and I melted against him, feeling the solid strength of his body, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my palm. In that moment, wrapped in his embrace with the city waking below us, I felt like I'd finally found where I belonged. Then welcome to the family, he murmured against my hair, his voice rough with emotion. Such as it is. 6 months later, I stood in our study, Dante's and mine now, the possessive pronoun feeling natural on my tongue, reviewing behavioral analysis reports on potential threats to the organization. My psychology degree had finally found its purpose, though not in any way my professors would have imagined or approved of. I'd become Dante's secret weapon, the one who could read people's intentions before they acted, who could spot betrayal in body language and micro-expressions that others missed completely. The men who worked for him had learned to respect my assessments, even if they didn't always understand how I made them. I'd prevented 3 potential coups, identified 2 undercover federal agents, and helped negotiate peace with 2 rival organizations, all by reading the truth in people's faces when they thought they were hiding it. Maya had eventually forgiven me for lying about my relationship with Dante, especially after he tripled her salary and made her general manager of the Silver Spoon with a stake in ownership. She'd become one of the few connections I maintained to my old life, a reminder of who I'd been before everything changed. Olivia had recovered from her ordeal and now stopped by the penthouse regularly, treating me like the sister she'd never had, dragging me to art galleries and demanding my opinion on pieces I didn't understand but pretended to appreciate. She'd become my anchor to normalcy, reminding me that not everything in Dante's world was about violence and power. And Isabella had disappeared the night Marcus died, vanishing like smoke despite Dante's best efforts to track her. But sometimes, late at night, encrypted messages appeared on Dante's secure phone. Intelligence about rival organizations, warnings about potential threats, information that had saved lives more than once, all signed only with a single initial, I. "She's watching over us," Dante had said when the first message arrived 2 weeks after Marcus's death. In her own way, she's still protecting what matters. Trying to atone for 7 years of betrayal by giving us the intelligence we need to survive. "Do you forgive her?" I'd asked. "I understand her," he'd replied, which wasn't quite the same thing but was probably the closest he'd come to forgiveness. The door opened now, and Dante entered, pulling me into his arms with the easy familiarity of 6 months together, 6 months of learning each other's rhythms, of building something real amid the chaos. Outside, Boston stretched beneath us, a city full of dangers and opportunities, of enemies and allies, of a life I'd never imagined living. "Any regrets?" he asked softly, the question he'd asked me every day for the past 6 months, his daily check-in to make sure I was still choosing this life, still choosing him. I thought about the waitress I'd been, struggling with bills, worried about rent, wondering if my degree would ever lead anywhere meaningful, mourning my mother and drowning in debt. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone who'd existed in a different lifetime. "Not a single one," I whispered, and meant it with every fiber of my being. He kissed me, deep and slow and full of promise, the promise of protection, of partnership, of a love built on trust in a world where trust was the rarest commodity. And in that moment, surrounded by the life we'd built together from danger and trust and impossible choices, I knew I was exactly where I belonged. The waitress who'd saved a crime lord's life was gone, transformed into someone stronger. In her place was a woman who'd walked through fire and emerged transformed, who'd found love in the most unlikely place, who'd learned that sometimes the right choice was the dangerous one. And I wouldn't change a single moment of it. Outside, the city hummed with life, deals being made, threats being neutralized, powers shifting in the eternal dance of Boston's underworld. But here, 40 stories above it all, wrapped in Dante's arms with the taste of his kiss still on my lips, I'd found something more valuable than safety. I'd found home. The end.